Hello and thanks for joining us for today's Movie Madness.
I'm not crazy! He's here.
And we're joined in the studio by our film critic Lisa Nesselson. Hello, Lisa.
Hello, Eve.
Now, we're starting with director Steven Soderbergh's movie Unsane. Now, we know him for winning the top prize in Cannes when he was only 26 for Sex, Lies and Videotape. He's recently been making TV and a TV series called The Nick because he thought movie making had become a dead end. Tell us about his return to the big screen.
Well, I don't want to say too much, except that the central character, the fetchingly named Sawyer Valentini, gets more than she bargained for when she picks a name out of the phone book and goes for an initial consultation at what she believes to be a support network for victims of stalking. Sawyer Valentini is a young woman who has recently moved from Boston to Pennsylvania for a new job as a financial analyst. She's obviously really smart, and she's not nice. She doesn't go out of her way to be nasty. She's just curt, no nonsense, and self-assured. She's the main protagonist, so we're torn about actually identifying with her or being concerned for her welfare.
And why should we be concerned for her welfare? Is she being stalked?
Well, it's hard to say. Maybe she once had a stalker, but moving from one state to another probably solved that problem. Then again, she may have managed the 21st century pinnacle of out of the frying pan and into the fire, or not. It's literally impossible to say. And those layers of vacillating doubt are delicious for us as viewers, absolutely not for Sawyer. Let's take a look.
Yes, hi. My name is Sawyer Valentini. I am at Highland Creek Behavioral Health Facility. I am being held here against my will. Please, send help. Thank you. I'll be out of here in like 20 minutes.
Do you know how many calls the cops get like that every week?
Those are from crazy people.
Do you know how many times I screamed out during watching this film, much to the annoyance of the people sitting around me in the press screening? It is pretty unsettling, isn't it?
That it is, and we have to be on our toes as viewers. Is Sawyer clinically depressed and harboring latent violent impulses, or is she normal, but with pretty excellent reasons to behave the way she does? This is a look at how American society treats women, about how American law enforcement may or may not be on top of things, and most interestingly, how the American healthcare system may not actually be all that interested in providing useful medical care. All of these elements make it a scary movie with a very pertinent core. There's a lot going on here. The performances are wonderful, especially the Crown's Claire Foy as Sawyer we saw there. A colleague who saw it before I did said it's extremely violent, and that it is, but no more violent than the aspects of American life that it's addressing. So I'd call it useful violence, as far as you can get from gratuitous. Soderbergh does a lot with relatively little. As a side note, he shot the whole film on an iPhone. With artificial intelligence on the rise and iPhones sort of ruling our lives, I can't help wondering whether a bunch of iPhones are getting together and planning to go see this movie together later today. And think about it. When another patron has their phone on in the dark, you're thinking, that's incredibly rude. They should turn off their phone and watch the movie. But quite possibly it's the phone that manipulated the person into taking it to the theater. And it's fun to see Amy Irving as Sawyer's mom.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next film. Marcello Fonti won the Best Actor Award at Cannes this year for his portrayal of a modest dog groomer in Matteo Garrone's Dogman. I really like this movie, especially the gritty underworld we see in Italy. Where would you put it on a scale of bark to bite?
Woof, woof, woof. I enjoyed this thoroughly. Although it's an awful tale of wildly uneven friendship gone horribly wrong, It was inspired, alas, by actual events. Now, 10 years ago, Matteo Garrone directed the excellent and absolutely terrifying Gomorrah, based on the investigative reporting by Roberto Saviano into how the mafia functions. And that author has feared for his life around the clock ever since. He did such a good job. The mob operates like a bully with weapons and no constraints. So in Dogman, that terrifying logic plays out between Marcello, a modest dog groomer who sells cocaine on the side, and one of his customers, a hulking meanie named Simone, whose brain doesn't work so well, maybe because he's always using his head as a battering ram. Marcello is the divorced father of a daughter he absolutely dotes on. He's obviously liked and respected by the other small businessmen in their ramshackle seaside town, and they all see thuggish and dangerous Simone as something that cannot be reasoned with. They don't seem to be kidding when they entertain the idea of all pitching in and paying someone to make sure he has a fatal accident. As viewers, of course, we recoil at that proposed solution, but as the film continues, that begins to sound not completely unreasonable. Here's what happens when Simone gets it into his head that he'd be able to burglarize the jewelry store next door if only his friend Marcello would just give him the keys to his shop.
Chiudi, portami le chiavi, dai. Mi porti le chiavi, ci penso io. Per una volta te faccio sbortare.
Non mi aspettare, non ti porto niente. Non ti porto niente, non mi aspettare proprio. Non mi aspettare. Non venga. No. Non venga. No. Aia. Aia.
Mi devi sentire quando te parlo, Marcello.
Oh.
Sono amico tuo io. Sì o no?
Sì.
Is there really anything you can do in a situation like that, though? The gangsters normally win out, don't they?
Well, that's what you keep asking yourself while you're watching this. What would I do? Marcello goes from reluctantly providing his dog pickup van as a getaway car for Simone to plotting a radical solution for getting away from Simone. I've seen a lot of movies, and I don't think I have ever seen a sequence quite like the one where Marcello learns that a dog is in danger at a crime scene, and he risks, plunging to his death to try and save the pup. Rescuing those youngsters from the flooded cave in Thailand, that was exciting, but I think I'll remember this far longer.
And the frozen dog. Out this week in France is a French documentary that's called John McEnroe in the Realm of Perfection. Is this strictly for tennis lovers?
In a word, no. Personally, I'm only mildly interested in the game of tennis, but this is an unclassifiable cinematic oddity that came to be in a fascinating manner. It turns out there's an institution called INSEP, the National Institute for Sport, and they have an archive full of films, most of which were shot to record top athletes in hopes of studying their moves and learning from them. So for decades, a filmmaker named Gilles de Kermadec shot 16mm footage of athletes, often in slow motion, and his original work on how-to films in the 1960s is very amusing at this remove. Tennis players were certain they were demonstrating the exact same motion over and over again, but of course the film proved that that wasn't the case. As Jean-Luc Godard once said, cinema lies, but sports don't. Gilles de Kermadec switched to shooting profiles of top tennis players while they were actually playing at Roland Garros to get the real moves. He'd shoot 20 hours of footage to make a half-hour profile, and the last one he made was about John McEnroe, who in 1984 had been the #1 tennis player in the world for 4 years and was about to play Ivan Lendl here in Paris at Roland Garros. Now, Julien Farreau, who crafted the film out this week we're talking about, was with Gilles de Kermadec when they happened to lay eyes on all of those rushes and all of those film cans. And so he spent years sifting through those absolutely unique shots made from different angles than, say, TV coverage to show us how McEnroe created a bubble of perfection that morphed into something else. Let's take a look.
Thanks to his dexterity on the tennis court, it is John McEnroe who dictates and who allows himself the right to say cut by shortening the rally. He found it difficult when someone else wanted to take charge of exchanges, and he doesn't hesitate to ask the technicians under his orders for what reasons the film of the match has been interrupted.
What's the problem? It's a second serve. The ball was out. The hitter served, it was out. I don't understand.
That voiceover was Matthew Almaric in zombie mode a little bit, but the doc touches on the relationship between early film pioneers and tennis and brilliantly compares the rude and vulgar McEnroe to the rude and vulgar Mozart. Both men behave badly in public and happen to be geniuses. Interestingly, McEnroe never had a coach. He just was. I saw this at a preview with the director on hand, and he was asked whether McEnroe himself had seen it, and if so, what did he think? And he replied that McEnroe's agent sent the laconic 3-word review, he liked it.
It's good to know. Moving on now to 30 years ago, German filmmaker Percy Adlon released a very strange film set in the California desert. It's called Bagdad Cafe. It's also known as Out of Rosenheim. It was a runaway hit here in France, and its theme song blared from everywhere for months on end. Why?
That's an excellent question. But I can confirm that people who never or hardly ever went to the movies made a point of going to see this. And that theme song really was inescapable, blaring from everywhere. Marian Sajbrecht stumbles into an odd sort of diner run by CCH Pounder. And in the sun-drenched surroundings, strange things happen in a charmingly plotless way. Everyone's fun to watch, but veteran actor Jack Palance is particularly wonderful.
Okay, Lisa, thank you very much. For its 30th birthday, Bagdad Cafe has been restored and is back in cinemas in France this summer, and the new version is available on DVD as well. Remember our website. We're also on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.
There's this woman checked in last night from Rosenheim. I don't know how dangerous she is.
Stop. Not so much water.
I mean, she shows up out of nowhere without a car.
Greg, put this baby in the pot. He'll be ready for dinner.
How come she acts so funny, like she was gonna stay here forever? And with no clothes? No, I don't like it.
Greislich.
On this week's episode of France in Focus, we're taking you to the set of thriller The Bureau for a sneak peek behind the scenes at a revitalised industry to ask whether French fiction can compete with its US and British rivals, whether French storytelling has evolved and what makes an export hit.
France in Focus on France 24 and France24.com.
Join me this week in central Portugal. It's here. Last year, the area suffered the country's deadliest forest fires on record. The poor emergency response was largely to blame, but so too was eucalyptus. Now it's a combustible tree, but the local economy relies on it. So is Portugal cultivating a profitable plant or harvesting disaster? We find out on Down to Earth.
Down to Earth, presented by Molly Hall on France 24 and France24.com.